Why don't you get another chair and slide in?
I need to go up there anyways.
But you don't save it onto your site? When you save it,
Even if I open it up, as soon as I close it, right? Even if I save it online, when I go to open it, it still asks me for the password.
Yes, so you can actually save it onto your computer.
I can save it on my computer and it still asks me for my password.
I think I've had enough examples.
Was that one of the ones that we had?
I guess as I'm standing here looking at it,
This one looks like it was a shorter one of the two, because the taller one had a rounded back, and this one has a square.
Those are leather.
Apparently you can get them made, isn't that what he said, made into, get them covered with cloth? It's nice.
Yeah.
On my arms.
No, I know. So yeah, this is just basically what she went through in terms of pros and cons. I think it just needs to be done right.
We're not going to look like we're really great decision makers. Shared decision makers.
Well, and we have we could always get there's a
I asked you. Of interest to the public? So do I. Good evening, everybody. We'll call this regular meeting of Prince Rupert City Council to order for Tuesday, November 12th, 2013. I'll ask Council to consider the adoption of the agenda, but first of all, I'd like to introduce to the public the new corporate administrator, also known as the city clerk or municipal clerk, although the official title under the community charter is corporate administrator. And it's Mr. Rory Mandrick, and welcome to the community. We hope you do well, and with that introduction, I'll ask you if there's any additions to the agenda this evening.
None that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll ask Council to consider the recommendation that the agenda for this regular Council meeting of November 12th, 2013 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is adopted. Next for the Council's consideration are the minutes. And there's a recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting of October 28th, 2013 be adopted. I'll ask Council's consideration of that recommendation. Councillor Ashley?
So
Thank you. It's been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Garon. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is adopted. The next recommendation is also for a set of minutes, and these are the regular council meeting minutes from the meeting of October 28th, 2013, and it comes with the recommendation that they be adopted. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Ashley. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are also adopted. We'll move on down to Item 6, which is reports and recommendations. And there's a report from the city planner concerning a boundary extension and the incremental proposal regarding this. It comes with a recommendation that the council instructs administration to submit the necessary documentation to the Ministry of Community Services requesting boundary expansion, and that's to include the municipal-owned property known as Lot 444, but it would exclude privately held properties. Mr. Long, would you like to go through the text, or Mr. Krekic? Good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a brief background to this report. This initiative was commenced with 2012 Council Strategic Plan. In 2013, Council conceptualized the border and directed the staff to proceed along the policies that were developed by the province. That included advising all property owners within the influenced areas, advising neighboring jurisdiction, federal, provincial, municipal, First Nations, responding to all inquiries, and culminating with a set of information meetings on May 29th and 30th. Following the information meeting on June 24th, Council instructions were to extend additional invitations to First Nations for a dialogue. This was done. And to report in the fall on the state of the on the update of the process. So that's what we're doing today. Everything remains on the city website. It's easy to find under Mayor and Council, boundary expansion. Here we have all the reports to the Council, the legislative framework, engagement, obligations, and the proposal, and I will use this map that we have here for the rest of my analysis. So essentially the time from the information meeting until now has been fairly quiet, as the project lead only received a couple of 3 inquiries. They were general nature. In a nutshell, those who are in favor of this activity are by and large quiet, as this is showed to be a controversial item earlier in the year, and those who are against it remain negative against it. So in a nutshell, while it's a good idea to work towards a common approach to planning for the future and without abandoning the intent of bigger picture, it appears that changing the scope to the property owned by the city of Prince Rupert, and essentially that is the property that's in green color right here, referred to as Lot 444, which has some private properties. I'm pointing the arrow where they are. All of these property owners were notified, and I do not have anything written with respect to their opinion as to the expansion. They may have attended the public meeting. I do not have that record either. So this would be the incremental approach to expanding the city boundary, essentially this area here. And so it is a reasonable approach to take this task incrementally, to keep the intent of the big picture, the original extent of the expansion as work in progress. Sometimes that ends up being a binder on a shelf that sits there for some time. Sometimes it's moved at a faster rate. And to scale down the current expansion plan to the property that city owns, which is Lot 44, and therefore the recommendation, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. So the intention here tonight with the action of council is to work to include the land that the city owns, which is the lot referred to as Lot 444 within our boundaries. And of course, one of the reasons for that is that within that area is our watershed. So we would move to protect our watershed. And as the owner of the land, there's no reason why the municipal corporation, being the owner, should not move to have its own land within its own boundaries. Councillor Ashley.
I'm going to move the recommendation that Council instructs administration to submit the necessary documentation to the Ministry of Community Services requesting boundary expansion to include municipally owned property Lot 444, excluding privately held properties.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Ashley.
Just to echo what you said, it makes sense for us to have this property that belongs to us as fee simple property within our boundaries. We as a municipality should control the use of it, the zoning of it, and all of the things that are part of that. Right now it's in the regional district, and I think it should be in the city of Prince Rupert's hands.
Thank you. Councillor Thorkelson.
I understand correctly from this report to council that this is incremental. We're not dropping we're still going to be proceeding maybe in a slower fashion, but to expand our boundary to that area. I'm still. I agree with this motion. I think that it doesn't. I had no idea really till we started doing this boundary expansion that the city held property outside our own boundaries, and I think that we should get that into our own boundary. But I am concerned that we continue with this process, because I do think that we need to have control of development that is going on within and around the harbor and around the city of Prince Rupert. And quite frankly, Port Edward owns all the way out to Tyee and hold a huge chunk of property, and they're able to develop and get development money from much of that property that they control all the way out to Tyee, and they have there's a gravel operation at Rainbow that they're able to tax. Because their boundaries are so large, and they have. It was in the paper the other night that they're got Wainwright Basin. There's a proposal there that they sold some land on, and obviously they're going to be able to tax that. So they have the ability to tax because they own a huge chunk of property, and we own much larger city, and we own a third or a quarter of the amount of property that Port Edward owns. And I think that we should be consulting with our First Nation neighbors about some issues that we can about development and revenue sharing, if that's issues about how to determine zoning, if they want to have zoning discussions. And I know, Your Worship, we've made a number of contacts with them, and everybody's been too busy to get together. But I think that we need to keep trying on that, because I don't really want to drop the control of development in our area and leave it up to the regional district. I'm sorry. I know I'm going to hurt people's feelings in the regional district, but I do feel that it's not the regional district that it's providing all of the services for everybody who's going to be in this area. It's the City of Prince Rupert, and I think that we need to have some say in our future. So thank you.
Thank you. I won't talk about the regional district, but they're as interested as we are in development and quality of life.
Yeah.
Council, any further comments? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is adopted. Next is a report from the General Manager of Engineering and Public Works, and this has to do with the plowing of snow to the center of the roads. And it's a recommendation that Council receive this report for information purposes. Mr. Long, would you like to outline the text of the report for the people watching by television from home?
Yeah, I've asked Mr. Horn to come and speak to his two.
Would you like Mr. Horn to do it? Yes, Mr. Horn, if you'd like to. Thank you for coming here this evening. Like a lot of other people, I'm not encouraging snow this year, but it's good that everybody has an understanding of what the city does should it happen.
Your Worship, I really don't like snow, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it happens every once in a while. I guess we had a request from council, a member of council, wondering why we don't plow the snow to the center line of the road. It's assumed that this inquiry was basically for the downtown core area, 3rd Avenue, and some of the side streets. The problem with snow in the downtown core is we have very narrow streets in the downtown core, and with parking on both sides, and you're trying to plow the snow into a small windrow in the middle of the road, it takes up a fair amount of space. I know it's not always good, but we sometimes have to plow the snow up onto the sidewalks to get the space back on the road. In normal circumstances in Prince Rupert, in the winter time, we have a fairly large dump of snow, and then it rains for about a week. And the biggest problem we have is when it rains and then freezes, we end up with a lot of ice on the streets and the sidewalks itself. But in the past years, we haven't had the snow removal budget to remove the snow in a timely manner. And but hopefully in the future, as the economy improves and our budgets get a little better to deal with that, we can actually send the crews out to take the snow away from the edge. The plowing on the center of the road, it becomes an awkward situation, especially if when the trucks go out to plow and you can't see the center line properly. What happens sometimes, they can plow too far onto one side of the road, making one side of the road narrower than the other, and you have to go back and fix that. The other one was windrows of snow in the middle of the road restricts traffic flow. If you've got parking on the side of the street and you got a travel lane, a vehicle breaks down or a truck parks to deliver materials to some businesses like they do on 3rd Avenue, it basically blocks the whole street on that one traffic lane for the whole length. Larger vehicles such as delivery vans, garbage trucks, and even the snowplows may have difficulty getting down the street because of the narrowness, causing issues about basically they can get stuck in the lanes. Pedestrians, especially small children, when they're coming across the road, when you have fairly large windrows in the middle of the road, they restrict the visibility of the crosswalks. And the worst one of it is the snow melt. We have this windrow of snow in the middle of the road, and it's going to drain to the curbs. In the wintertime, when you have the snow, it shows up, build it up in the middle, then it rains for the next day, and you get a large amount of runoff from the windrow. It'll freeze on the pavement. And because we're trying to run the salt and sand on that, the amount of runoff can actually wash the salt and sand off. It takes more salt and sand to take care of the ice. I know that in the past we have done some snow removal in the middle in the center line of the road. And years ago, I think we had that's the way we did it for quite a long time. Before 3rd Avenue was actually narrowed down with the wider sidewalks. But the issue with that is it's just not wide enough anymore to do that. It's not feasible on 3rd Avenue. And I don't think they ever did it on the side streets. It was always plowed to the curb line. So at this point, I don't think there's a good reason to change our snow removal policy unless council has a good reason for it. I think it's the easiest way to do it. I think we'd be much more effective if we can just get the snow removed from the streets as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Like you, the council will watch the weather. Councillor Kinney.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Bill. The only thing I'm thinking of too there is to save some money, because every time they plow the damn snow up onto the sidewalks and stuff, well, fine, we know we have to clean it. But in a half an hour from there, you've got your men back cleaning the drains.
Yeah, the drains are always going to be an issue. It doesn't matter whether you do it from plowing to the edge or not, because you're going to get the slush build up in the curb line, and that's the reason why. It's not so much that the snow is built up on the drains. You just have to keep them clean from the slush that's running off from the melt.
Councillor Ashley, Councillor Thorkelson.
So from a public works perspective, are there any policies that council could put in that would help in this situation? I'm not talking about this specific, but in terms of snow removal, in terms of like policies, is there anything that from your expertise that policies we could put in place that might assist?
In the downtown core, you already have a snow removal policy where all the merchants have to keep the sidewalks clear of ice and snow. The biggest issue with that in 3rd Avenue right now, there's a lot of businesses closed down. So you don't get that instantaneous compliance to the bylaw. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days, but hopefully they get it done. I know we've had a few places where we've had to send crews out to salt and sand sidewalks and remove snow because the landlord wasn't available.
Please go ahead.
So when that happens, then do the landlords in those cases get charged for the city crews having to go out and do what they're supposed to do?
In most cases, we do that. I wouldn't say it happens on everyone, but in most cases, we do kind of give them a warning to start with, and hopefully they comply for the rest of the season.
Councillor Thorkelson.
Well, I can remember, and it's not all that long ago, that when it was plowed to the center, and I thought it was a far better solution, but I'm not the person that's having to do the removal, so I'll bow to that. What I am concerned with, though, is not on the city and on downtown, because the merchants obviously do get out and shovel. What I have been distressed about, and what we've talked about on and off over the few years I've been on council now, is when the city trucks plow and put it back onto the sidewalks of the streets around town that residents have plowed. And so residents have plowed those streets. The city plow comes along, and because there's no boulevard, right, pushes the snow onto the cleared sidewalks. And I don't know if you've done much walking in the snow, but I've done lots of walking in the snow, and it is almost impossible once that to remove that ice encrusted snow when it gets pushed onto. So, if there could be some kind of a discussion with the snow plows about not roaring up and down 6th, 5th. Those are the streets that most people walk on downtown this way, and the other way is on the area down Fulton and on the park, and where there's no grass between the street and the sidewalk. So when they come and shovel it back on, and I've seen, particular on Fifth, there's about 4 houses where they shovel, and I've been given an earful many times when I've been walking by. They'll run out and give me an earful because they have just shoveled, and the snowplow has shoveled right back on.
So you're talking about people that clear their driveways. You said clear their streets.
No, it's clear their sidewalks in front of their house, right? So and they clear it, and then somebody comes by the snowplow.
Comes by and backfills it. Yes.
And then it's even heavier, right? So now you got to clear the ice off, and when they don't clear it, those streets, especially going downhill, are almost impossible to walk on. And so people want to now walk on the roads, and you see people walking on the roads, which is far more dangerous than if they were walking on the sidewalk. So I mean, I understand snow is not a huge problem for like it is in Prince George, but somehow I think we need to address that. Second Avenue and Third Avenue are better because the people who own the storefronts shovel, so it's not a problem. But walking down any of those streets that I've mentioned, especially going downhill on Fulton, if it's been pushed back up or downhill and the city hasn't got around to removing that snow, I can just tell you it's a problem.
So you're talking about keeping the sidewalks clear along the major arteries into the town.
Yeah, and the we raised that as an issue under the green plan when we were doing the green plan, because it just people would prefer to drive in the winter than walk because the sidewalks are so poor. But it was identified that we didn't have enough money to go around clear them. So
certainly, so. It's an additional cost to do that. If we were to do that, we'd have to take money from somewhere else. Bearing in mind that you think community enhancement grants shouldn't go any lower. Councillor Garon, good evening.
Good evening. That was my question, was going to be, how much would it cost to do what we want to do?
We'd have to be very specific with the staff as to which streets we wanted done. They'd look at an average and try and approximate a cost.
And we also don't have enough equipment either to do the job. So, it's understandable that we have to put up with what we have to put up until there's more money to deal with, and then we can go ahead and worry about snow. But I don't think we're getting snow this year. So.
Yes, Mr. Horn.
I'd just like to add a comment to that. I've had a couple of reports to people who have come in and asked the same question about what you're talking about. It's always a fight between the property owner and the snowplow. And it comes as a surprise to me because I try to explain to people, if you take the snow and you pile it against your fence or in the front of your property, you're not fighting the snowplow anymore. The snowplow knows where the curb line is. It's easier to deal with. Sometimes you can get that snow off and get it onto your I mean, it's on the boulevard still. It's still on city property in most times, but at least it gets it off the road allowance and it leaves your sidewalk wide open. I know myself and my 2 neighbors on either side of us, we both came up to that conclusion, and we can keep our parking stalls wide open all winter long. It doesn't take that much more effort. So it depends on how you do it. I know that Ken, he plows the snow all the way down the street and keeps that open. Does a good job of it.
Yeah, well, Ken would like it to snow and he could plow all the way up the street. That's what Ken prays for, snow so he can plow. But that's not it. It's those homeowners that are shoveling the sidewalk for pedestrians, and there's about 3 or 4 of them that on Fifth Avenue, basically across from the old folks home on Fifth, and then another group further down on the middle, maybe 300 block on. And I mean, people sit there and shovel, and I think they probably do shovel it onto the road, right? And then the snowplow comes and shovels it back on the sidewalk. But what it is if there's a way to even slow down that snowplow so that it doesn't get onto the sidewalk. And I mean, I understand, but it is a struggle walking on those sidewalks, and that is what the issue. And people actually go all the way to to shoveling the sidewalk for pedestrians, and then they see it being covered back up again. It is very frustrating.
Councillor Ashley.
I'll move that we receive this report for information purposes.
Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Garon, that the report be received for information purposes. Any further discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That recommendation is adopted. Next is a report from the General Manager of Engineering and Public Works, and this concerns the retaining walls, 2 of them on Atland Avenue and 1 of them on 17th Street. And it comes with a recommendation that Council receive this report for information purposes. And Mr. Horn, if you would please outline your report for people that are watching from home that don't have agendas.
We've the 3 retaining walls that have been identified as being. Thank you. There's been 3 retaining walls that have been identified as being in a state of sad repair on Atland and 17th Street. One of them is adjacent to a home between Van Arsdal and 17th Street. It's probably closer to Van Arsdal. It's a fairly large rock wall. It's bulging at the bottom. It's not failed yet, but it's going to. It's a fairly extensive wall to replace. It's going to be quite costly because of the utilities and everything that's close by to that area. The other one is a smaller wall that's closer to 17th Street, still on Atland Avenue, that needs to be replaced. Similar idea. It starts out quite small, about 1 meter high to about 2.5 meters by the very end, where it ties into the rest of the driveways that are built up there. I know a couple of the homeowners on that section would like to have off-street parking and would like to build their driveways up too, so we're trying to work with them on that one. The other one is on 17th Street and is probably the one that's got the biggest issue with it. Basically, that one has a 1955 water line that runs right at the very toe of the wall. It's blown out twice in the last 5 years that I know of and caused a significant amount of damage to the property down below. We're looking at replacing that one. Basically, that'll be to relocate the water line and then build a new concrete wall in that area. They're all expensive. Retaining walls, they're just seismically, when you have to design them that way, there's a fair amount of concrete buttresses to put in to make sure that they take the traffic load. The rock walls, we had one on Seal Cove that blew out. We didn't expect to go about 3 weeks ago. And that one's going to have to be fixed first before we do any of the other ones.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Garon, Councillor Ashley.
Thank you for your report, Mr. Horn. Do we have like numerous walls in town? Are these like the priority right now, or we just don't know what the priority will be? Like, I'm just wondering why you're targeting these 3 right now. I'm sure there's many more around town that are in just as bad a shape.
The reason for this report was because of the public meeting we had. There was identified as 3 retaining walls that needed to be repaired, and that's why they're on the list. This list could go on. I could have 20 pages of this if you want them. There's a lot of rock retaining walls that are in state of ill repair in this town, and we hope that with a little bit of TLC we can keep them in place without having to do a lot of repairs to them now. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashley.
So I'd also like to thank you. I know that I brought this up and I appreciate it. I'm sure that the people that brought it up, or at least they know now, like kind of that we are aware of the situation. So that's, I mean, it may be a sort of small comfort, but at least they would know that this is something we're aware of. My question would be, and I don't expect you to have an answer for this, but I know we've got an infrastructure priorities list. Just using your best guesstimate, whereabouts would these be on the list?
On the list, okay. It's a huge list. I would say these would probably be in the top 20 of the ones. I mean, the Conrad Street wall that goes up a Conrad Street is probably number 1 still on the list. That's probably $1 million retaining wall, but it's not in very good condition.
I'll ask Council's consideration of the recommendation. Councillor Ashley.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Kinney, that Council receive this report for information purposes. Further discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That recommendation is adopted. The next item, thank you, Mr. Horn. The next item is a report from the Chief Financial Officer, and it's entitled Stuff the Bus Food Bank Drive, and it comes with a recommendation that Council support the food drive by allowing citizens with donations to ride city transit for free on November 30th, 2013. Mrs. Bauman, would you like to outline your report, please?
The report was actually prepared by my finance manager, Christine Yu, while I was away, but I can still outline it. It's basically the transit manager from the North Central region sent an email to the city requesting support for a local food drive campaign. It essentially talks about collecting food for the local food bank, and if anyone donates a non-perishable food item to the campaign, they ride the bus for free. There will be volunteers, mostly transit staff, collecting food from the public coming out of Safeway, and there will also be the option of leaving the food donation at Safeway. If residents bring food donations on the bus from other locations, the bus drivers will collect the food and issue a free ride transfer for that day to the person who is donating. It's a good opportunity and a great way to partner with another organization in the community to show support for the local food bank.
Thank you very much. It's moved by Councillor Kenny that Council support the food drive by allowing citizens with donations to ride city transit for free on November 30th, 2013. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Garon. Any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. So, Councillor Kenny, if you got a spare can of Spam, you and I can ride the bus on November 30th.
Good.
You can choose the route. We'll go up around Crestview, perhaps. Yes?
Just a question regarding that. I'm just wondering, for those people that would like to donate, but maybe perhaps aren't going to be riding the bus, they can make donations at Safeway. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Next is a report from the new corporate administrator concerning the Prince Rupert Airport Improvement Grant application. Comes the recommendation that Council pass a resolution supporting a $250,000 grant application to the Northern Development Initiative Trust for the airport improvement project. Mr. Mandrick, would you please outline the text of your report for those watching by television that may not have agendas?
Thank you, Your Worship. The Northern Development Initiative Trust has an economic diversification infrastructure grant availability of up to $250,000 for the city to put towards improvements. One of the aspects that we are looking at currently is the Prince Rupert Airport Improvement Project, which is looking at costing the city in the neighborhood of $7 million. This grant would go to helping fund part of that. It's a grant that is not repayable, meaning that it's not having to be matched and it's not having to be in any way returned to the funding body. And it just allows for a bit of a savings for the city. So the reason I stepped into it, because it was being handled by the finance director, was the fact that it was closing on Friday the 8th of November, and I wanted to make certain that the city got to take advantage of it. So that's why I stepped into it and have asked for a resolution of council.
Thank you very much. Any questions of Mr. Mandrick? Or Councillor Ashley, please go ahead.
I was going to move the recommendation.
Certainly.
But I did have a question.
Okay, well, it's been moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Kenny, that Council pass a resolution supporting a $250,000 grant application to the Northern Development Initiative Trust for the airport improvement project. And Councillor Ashley, you have a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, my question is, if we apply for this grant, how will this affect our ability to apply for grants from NDI next year and in the future, if at all?
If I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mandrick, but on an individual occurrence, you can apply year after year for a maximum of up to $250,000. So it's not under the old system where we had a certain amount of money that we could utilize. It's on a per application. Is that true?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Thank you. Yes.
So just further to that, then, just so I'm clear, and also that people listening are clear, if next year we had another $250,000 grant application and NDI found it was worthy, we could then possibly get that as well.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What this does, of course, is if we're successful with this, it means there's $250,000 that we would not have to borrow towards this project. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. Next, we'll move down to bylaws, and there's a Mayor and Council Indemnity Amendment Bylaw number 3336, 2013, and it comes with the recommendation that Council adopt the Mayor and Council Indemnity Amendment Bylaw number 3336, 2013. So that's the recommendation. The bylaw be adopted, and of course the intent of this bylaw is to not increase the stipend which goes to the Mayor and Council for the year 2013. I'll ask the Council's consideration. Councillor Garon?
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Garon and seconded by Councillor Ashley that the amendment bylaw for the Mayor and Council indemnity be adopted. Is there any further discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That is adopted. Next, we'll move down to the City Manager's report. Mr. Long.
Thank you, Worship. I will report at the next November meeting, the end of the month.
Okay. We'll move down to reports, questions, and inquiries from members of Council. Councillor Ashley.
I have a few, but I'll start with this one. I actually started looking through past council meeting minutes because I was trying to find where we had made this resolution because I remember talking about it, and it's about meeting with CN and asking them to come and meet with us about waterfront issues and stuff, and it was a while ago, and I don't know what happened with that. I couldn't find the resolution. I do remember talking about it, but I know that we asked staff, and this would have been before Mr. Long was here. I can't remember exactly when it was.
I wonder if perhaps it didn't come up in discussion, but we never did make a motion.
And so if that's the case, I would like to make a motion, and I'll make a motion that we would ask staff to write CN to come and meet with us regarding waterfront property and any kind of development that's happening there, and then I'll explain what I mean by that. And
certainly,
if I'm seconded.
Are you as specific as you want to be?
Well, we can talk with them about other issues as well if there are other issues that council members want to.
Sure, but the only reason I ask that you be specific is that when staff gets a hold of them, are they going to send somebody that's in charge of trains, or are they going to spend somebody who's in charge of land development, or are they going to send somebody?
Okay.
That's the only reason.
Okay, so I'll try and be specific here. The issue that I'm really wanting to talk about, but there may be other things that people would like to talk to them about, has to do with when Pinnacle came in front of us and actually at their public meetings and had the picture of what the waterfront was going to look like. And there was a very, even with all of the,
silos?
Yes, thank you. Silos. There was kind of like a fence along the CN property line, and then a cement trail along the beach, and it was kind of pretty, and people could still use the waterfront and everything else. And I understand that Pinnacle didn't have any ability to make that promise come true because CN is the one that owns that property. And the port has made it clear that they don't have the ability to make that come true because they don't own the property. And I would like to be able to meet with CN and talk to them about the possibility of people being able to access the waterfront a little bit more while maintaining the safety that I understand is a concern. And, the idea being that maybe there could be a fence built along the road and a trail built. Maybe the port might be willing to contribute to that because they've talked about waterfront development. And the other thing that kind of prompted me to do that is that, and this was back on January 9th, I did find this one, that we made a resolution to enter into negotiations, and this was when we were talking about waterfront. We knew that we could talk with the port about stuff east of Quinitza, but not west. Right? And so it was that we were going to enter into negotiations with CN and the port to talk about how we could develop the waterfront to the west of Quinitza. And I don't know where that kind of got lost in the process. We had a lot of changeover, so the chances are it's somewhere in the works somewhere.
Okay.
But that's where this is coming from.
Certainly. Thank you. So let's deal with the motion first. The motion would be to contact Canadian National Railway and ask for a representative who deals with property access and train and rail yard movements to come and talk to us. Yeah. Would you like to second that, Councillor Thorkelson?
Yes, I would,
Okay.
and
And
I'd like,
speak to it?
yes, I'd like to add that I don't think it needs to go into the motion, but the other thing is to have a look at what they could provide for noise abatement, for shunting, and also about locomotive engines, whether they, what they would need to do to have some kind of a plug-in. We're supposed to be the greenest port, supposed to have plug-in so boats don't run their engines all night, and I know that was a problem with CN for a while. I don't know if it's still a problem. We haven't received a complaint for a while about CN running their engines at night, but certainly the shunting is something that people talk about, and whether there's ability to have some noise abatement, what it would look like, because it may be that you have to have noise abatement, or you have to, and with that you lose your view, or you have, or I don't know. So I'd like to talk about that.
I've read in the CN reports that they do have a program where they do some or contribute towards landscaping adjacent some tracks to help delineate and to help cut down noise. But you're quite right. The view is a consideration there also. Yeah, certainly. Any further comment with regard to the motion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion is adopted. Yes, please go ahead.
The second one, we have a recreation advisory committee, and we are going to be presenting at the next council meeting. But something came up in our discussions that, if possible to do, is probably more of a timely thing. So I said I would bring it up and see what would be possible in the context of our discussions to try and promote the Civic Center more and find out, so that more people are using the Civic Center, which is basically the mandate of the committee. One of the things that came up is that perhaps one of the ways to do that might be to have, and we may do this already, so I'm also trying to find this out, to have a sale on recreation passes, especially since it's kind of Christmas time. It might be a way of trying to encourage some new users. So I wanted to ask whether or not that was something that possibly had been contemplated. If not, if you don't know, I understand that, but if we could find out.
Mr. Long?
Yeah, I think there are bylaw issues, but we can certainly report out. That doesn't sound like a bad plan.
Please go ahead.
So just because there were a number of different things, but we thought that this would be a way of just encouraging some people, especially at Christmas time, where somebody might that might be kind of interesting to try out the different things. If there's a way of doing it, we thought it would probably be a good idea. So we just wanted to pass that on as a possibility. We didn't know how it would fit into budget and considerations and other things like that.
You're right. It would make a good stocking stuffer. However, the fees and charges of a municipality are all laid out in accordance with legislation and a bylaw.
Right.
But that doesn't mean the bylaw couldn't be amended to suit.
And maybe that would be something that if it's not appropriate this year, we could try and incorporate that into budget discussions or something along those lines. Sure. My last thing, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but as I was going through looking for the resolution about the CN stuff, I came across a number of resolutions that have somehow fallen to the wayside. And I don't want to spend a lot of time right now because I'd like to have staff look at them and ask. And what I'm going to ask is that if I forward this to staff and council, that we can maybe get a report on what's happening with
Certainly.
with the various.
I have some of those also that Mr. Long and I are going to go over. And it was my intention, and I've already discussed this with him, that we would go over those prior to council and senior staff's next strategic planning session, so that they don't get totally lost in the shuffle. As you can appreciate, Mr. Long's been working on Watson Island and some other issues which have taken the majority of his time, but it is the intention to catch him up on the backlog.
Yeah, and one of the reasons is there were a couple of them that kind of related to community grants issues, and I just wanted to make sure staff was aware of those so that we implement them.
Certainly. Anything further? Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to throw in a couple of things for our senior center. They did a fabulous job on their bazaar. They had 3 sittings, the biggest they've had in a number of years, people. And I just want to put it out there that they've got so many programs growing now that a lot of the seniors that are watching tonight try and get involved because they're really working, and they've built their membership up to over 320 so far, and they would like to go bigger. And they're really working hard, and they're doing well.
Thank you very much. It could also be stated, of course, that the first Sunday of every month throughout the year, excluding June, July, and August, but the rest of the year, the seniors on that first Sunday of each month have a seniors pancake breakfast that they use as a fundraiser, and there's a variety of people that come there and volunteer. And there's a variety of people in the community that go there for each of those pancake breakfasts. But they're open to anybody in the community at large. So if somebody would like to support them and go there and have a pancake breakfast, that's a consideration. Is there anything further? Before I give the mayor's report, I was away last week and I missed a meeting which is Sustainable Marine Fisheries and Communities Alliance. The acronym for it is SMIFCA. It's been going on for a number of years, and of course it's marine related and has a lot to do with the salmon fishing industry and the various participants and the various people involved in that fishery. And so I'll ask Councillor Thorkelson if she could update us on that, please.
I attended a meeting, thank you, Your Worship, on behalf of the city, and I had greetings from the city in order to all of the First Nations who showed up. And we had First Nations from Bella Bella, almost everybody, the communities from the NAFs were present, and quite a number of the Tsimshian communities were present as well. There were 2 topics for discussion. One was the major topic was regarding monitoring of the commercial fleet. I don't know if Council remembers last year, but the monitoring costs were so large they're actually larger than the commercial fleet's income until we were able to beat that back. But that was DFO's demand for. DFO was able to change what they wanted last year because it was only a pilot project. But this is a national project. It's going across Canada to have the commercial fisheries, all commercial fisheries, monitored and paid for by the fishermen themselves. And so we have known of this project for a long time. And what the SMIFCA, which included City of Prince Rupert and Port Edward, I think Charlotte City has sent representatives, and the regional district, as well as the First Nation communities, thought that we'd have a good strategy would be to use First Nations fisheries officials who are already out monitoring food fish and train them to monitor the commercial fishery. And that has in fact worked well for 5 years now. DFO, because it's gone national, has now said that we can no longer use the First Nations as monitoring agencies, because you have to be a service provider that has passed a certain requirements, and the requirements for the service provider are almost impossible for anybody to do. I think there's only two companies, which is Archipelago and J.O. Thomas, that are certified service providers for British Columbia. And every different fisheries, you have to have a different certificate as a service provider. So if you want to be a service provider for crabs, you have to have a different certificate than if you could be a service provider for salmon or for ground fish or for something else. So you have to have all of these, jump through all these hoops, and they're very large. And then you have to get your individual people you hire and recertify them every year for so you hire an observer or hire a monitor, you have to recertify them to certain standards every year. And some of those standards are totally ridiculous. They wanted helicopter rescue certification for people who are going to go out on a gill netter so that you could go pluck them off the boat. Well, it might make sense if you're in Newfoundland on a 200 out in 200 miles at sea to get a helicopter rescue, but this is that you would have to be trained to be helicopter rescued off of a small boat, and of course nobody has money to do that kind of thing. So what the group decided was to politically try to change to work together. There's going to be a resolution I'm going to bring to council from that group, but to try to get all the communities to sign on to a letter asking Ottawa to change to regionalize those requirements instead of have them nationalized, but regionalize them so they make sense and so we at least have a chance of trying to have service providers on this coast that can do that without creating a monopoly of one or two groups that can do it, but actually permit First Nations to be able to become a service provider. And the second thing, recommendation that's going to be coming in front of council is to see whether council would support going to NDI on a cross-regional fund for, I think it's 15 or 25 or $35,000 to do a feasibility study on what it would take for communities to create a community and what it would look like to create a community-based monitoring alternative that would be able to provide monitoring to all groups, whether they be sports or, because sports industry is also going to have monitoring. We don't know what it's going to look like, but they're going to have some monitoring, and to try to keep it down and keep the employment in our communities. So that was the first bit of discussion. The second bit of discussion was again on privatization of the salmon resource. The DFO is going around to talk to the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board, which they consider to, that's three people from the north who reside on the north coast, and about privatization. And they're going to be talking to the First Nations Fisheries Council and maybe to individual First Nations, they haven't decided, about privatizing the access to salmon and making it an individual right, which can be sold and leased to anybody without the necessity of having a boat, and which means somebody in Ontario could own a license and then lease that license back in British Columbia for somebody to fish and have there would be no continuity between interest in the fish and ownership of a quota or license. So that discussion also went on. And there's no resolution about that other than that we are trying. I think most communities are opposed to privatization of salmon, and want to keep it a public resource. So anyway, that was the discussions that went on, Your Worship. It was a very good meeting. It was a 2-day meeting, and it's always exciting when you get people from Bella Bella all the way up, and we usually have somebody from the New Hawk, which is Bella Coola, and somebody from Oakino, but they were unable to come this time. But it's always exciting to bring people from Haida Gwaii, the Nass, the Central Coast, and those of us on the North Coast together to have discussions about how we can extract value out of our community. And one of the things I just want to say, there's $400 million. $400 million that is produced north of Cape Caution, that's halfway down the coast, every year in wholesale value in wild salmon in wild fish. Wholesale value of wild fish, not farm fish. And landed value is between $150 and $200 million a year. That's obviously not coming through our communities. It's leaving our communities, and that is what we're trying to make sure sticks in our communities, is at least the landed value, if not the wholesale value.
So with regards to the proposal to NDI, it would have the support of the Skeena Queen Charlotte Regional District, the Kitimat Stikine Regional District, the Central Coast Regional District, and the Bulkley Nechako?
We didn't have anybody who would be in the Bulkley Nechako Regional District, but it would be the other three that you mentioned.
Babine and the
We didn't
fishery
have
up there?
anybody from the Inland First Nations. We're going to try to talk to them and see if they want to be part of this or not as well.
Right.
The Nishka certainly did seem was interesting, but the
So nobody
Skeena,
from Kitwanga came?
nobody from the Skeena Fish Commission, which is the authority up there, was made it. Although
Right.
they were invited.
Okay, thank you. Who's going to head up the proposal? Who's going to initiate it?
There's a committee of 3, and for the life of me, I can't remember who
that's okay.
who was on that committee.
All right, thank you. I'll give the mayor's report. First of all, we've discussed this item before, but I've received a letter from the BG Group in consideration of their upcoming presentation. And it states, as we discussed, if you'd like to send some questions in advance, we can make sure we have the appropriate technical personnel on hand to give you full answers. And this is with regards to the liquefied natural gas plant proposal on Ridley Island. And it says, similarly, we'd be delighted to bring one of our LNG experts to Prince Rupert to give a presentation on LNG global markets. This presentation would lay out our view of global LNG supply and demand with a focus on Asia and help put the Prince Rupert projects into perspective. So once again, residents are welcome to pass any questions they have to members of City Council so that we can submit them to the BG Group so that we can get answers to questions from residents and from members of council when they come to do a presentation. I mentioned this before also, but I attended the Senior Center Pancake Breakfast held for the month of November. And these pancake breakfasts are being held once a month, except holidays during the summer months, and are open to anyone in the community, including Prince Rupert, Port Ed, and the surrounding villages. I was away last week and participated in the Western Transportation Advisory Council's mid-year meetings. The topics were to do with port safety and response to emergencies at large entities, and also interprovincial transportation in Western Canada. The ministers of transportation and infrastructure for the 4 western provinces were participating, and a representative from Transport Canada also spoke about that entity's focus when working in conjunction with each of the 4 provinces. And there's a large focus on the countries that make up the Pacific Rim and the export of Canadian goods through both the Port of Prince Rupert and the Port of Vancouver. And yesterday I participated in the annual Remembrance Day ceremony. And various members of council were there, and I laid a wreath at the cenotaph on behalf of all Prince Rupert residents in remembrance of those who fought as well as those who lost their lives. And the last item I have is a letter, and this letter is actually in the public correspondence package, and it's a letter from the Minister of Community, Sport and Culture and Cultural Development, which outlines some of which Prince Rupert City Council is involved in when they attend the Union of BC Municipalities annual convention. And it reads in part, I appreciated our meeting at this year's UBCM convention in Vancouver. It was a good opportunity for me to hear some of the issues you face as leaders in your community. I appreciated hearing your delegates' concerns regarding the infrastructure upgrades needed to attract and support future industrial development. We are currently discussing a future federal-provincial long-term infrastructure plan with the federal government, as well as ongoing structure and delivery options related to the now permanent gas tax fund. Any new program decisions and subsequent funding programs will be clearly communicated to all local governments as and when they become available. The Ministry of Community, Sport and Cultural Development staff are very knowledgeable and experienced when it comes to our capital funding programs. We are available to answer any questions, whether specific to a project application, a current program inquiry, or a technical issue with a proposed or future project that you and your staff may have. In addition, putting together a benefit sharing framework for communities impacted by industrial development is a high priority for the province of British Columbia, and we are committed to creating a framework that works in your region. Ministry staff will continue to work with communities such as Prince Rupert as the framework is developed, and the information you provide us will greatly assist in this process. During our meeting, we also discussed development opportunities at the Port of Prince Rupert. I commend the important work you are doing to ensure Prince Rupert's economy continues to thrive. The province is committed to supporting business development and investment opportunities to help British Columbia communities reach their full potential. Please let ministry staff know how we can assist with the potential development of the port. I encourage you to also work with the Ministry of Jobs, Tourism and Skills Training, as it can provide tools and resources to assist with economic development airports. We are proud of the partnership we have with you and the support we have been able to provide to the City of Prince Rupert in meeting local priorities and making communities strong, healthy, and prosperous. And they've in fact enclosed a summary of funding that this council has been able to obtain from the province for various projects within the community. So it's a good example of the kind of thing that the council pursues when we go down to UBCM meetings. The last item tonight, and it's a consideration, the council does not have to act on this tonight, but I'd like you to consider this, that we operate the Digby Island Ferry. It provides the access and egress to the airport. And that vessel is operated under Canadian Steamship Inspection Regulation. And every so many years, that ship must go for a refit, which is very costly, but it's required because we're not only carrying dangerous cargoes at various times, but the other requirement, of course, is because we're carrying members of the public. And in past years, we were able to get a permit to operate for a fixed period of time, and then we had been allowed to ask for an exemption which would give us an additional year. So rather than having a vessel go to refit every 4 years, it could go every 5th years. And the reason for that was the vessel was exceptionally well maintained, and it had non-destructive testing done to it every time it went into a shipyard. And the rudder stocks were checked, the shafts were pulled, the hull itself was checked. And because it is a point-to-point ferry, it makes the same run every day and doesn't vary from that, we were allowed that exemption. I understand now in talking to the staff that the city is not allowed that exemption. And I think it's incumbent upon us, because it can lengthen out the time between refits, which are very expensive for that vessel, that we consider as a council sending a letter to the minister responsible for Canadian Steamship Inspection and asking why, after all these years on a point-to-point ferry operation, that this community is now denied that. After all, it is a vessel that does not leave these harbor limits. So I'll leave that with the council. You can consider that, and we can talk about it at a later date. But I think it's incumbent upon us to stick up for ourselves and ask why, at the very least. Councillor Ashley.
I'll make that a motion, but I think it should also have in there, and will they reconsider?
Certainly. So
I would make that a motion with that additional point.
Okay. So it's been moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Thorkelson. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion passes. We'll adjourn this meeting and reconvene to our in-camera meeting. Can I have a motion for that, please? Moved by Councillor Ashley, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. This meeting stands adjourned.